Welcome to Life After, a podcast for women to take you from feeling like you're just surviving to thriving, to creating a life you really love. Expect to discover tips and tricks to get there. Each episode will have actionable steps to empower you to make changes. I started this podcast because I've been through it all, from getting out of a marriage with a narcissist to completely rebuilding my life. And now I'm on a mission to help you too. You can change your life. It's absolutely possible. Hello, 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 and welcome. I'm so glad you're here. In this episode, we are going to talk about boundaries. I think it's appropriate that we talk about boundaries right after our last episode on trust, right? They really kind of go hand in hand. When I think about it, maybe I should have switched them. Maybe we should have done boundaries first and then trust. I don't know. What I do know is that I am absolutely not an expert on boundaries. I've talked about this before. I follow money mindset coach Denise Duffield-Thomas. And she always likes to say, I'm not a guru or an expert, I'm a contributor. So when it comes to boundaries, I'm telling you, I'm really not an expert. I work on them really diligently. And after not really having boundaries for most of my life, I'm really trying to improve my capacity around them. But I definitely don't consider myself an expert. So let's look at boundaries, and not just why I'm not an expert, but why so many of us are not experts when it comes to boundaries. There are some really, there's some really logical and reasonable and understandable reasons why this is. First, we're gonna do some basics on boundaries. So, here are just a couple of different definitions or ideas around boundaries. Boundaries are the limits that we set around what we will and won't accept. And we do that based upon what feels right or safe or aligned for us. Boundaries also are not about controlling other people. They're about deciding what works for you, what doesn't work for you, and how you're going to respond when someone crosses that line that you've predetermined. Boundaries are definitely not something we place on other people, right? We can't control what anyone else does. A boundary is something that we hold for ourselves. And what that means is that our boundaries are really linked to our self-regulation and our autonomy. Say that 10 times fast. Autonomy. And those two things, self-regulation and autonomy, are such key components to our psychological well-being. Now, this is important. Saying a boundary and holding that boundary are two very different things, right? So being able to say, I don't like that, don't do that, please don't do that, I'm not going to do this, right? Saying what your boundary is very different than when you have to really hold that boundary in place, which means that you have to maybe leave that situation, walk away, disengage, not participate, right? So it's two very different things to say we have a boundary and then to actually act on that boundary. Now, the reason that this is so important is because boundaries create safety and predictability for us. They create a sense of safety because then we know what to expect, and we know what to expect in a way that predetermines our safety, right? Because we know that that boundary is already going to make us feel safe. And when we have consistency and predictability, that creates emotional safety and regulation, right? So I'm using a lot of big words here, but they're all interrelated. And if you'll remember, in our recent episode on trust, we talked about, well, trust. And we also talked about attachment. Boundaries help us ascertain how trustworthy someone is. And that's why I wonder if maybe we should have done this episode before the trust episode. Because if we set a boundary and someone actively violates it, this can be one, and maybe a really big one, a really big indication of how trustworthy they are. So, all right, I've given you a whole bunch of big buzzwords. The reality is most of us struggle with our boundaries. And the reason is because we're taught, either really directly or even indirectly, that keeping the peace and being liked, any people pleasers out there, or avoiding conflict mattered more than honoring what we needed for ourselves. And, you know, these are the areas in our lives where struggling with our boundaries can be really apparent. That people pleasing thing, right? Do you find it's easier to just do what people want than to stand up for what you want? When we've experienced trauma, it can feel safer to not have boundaries. Absolutely, when we're in toxic relationships, our boundaries are being challenged all the time. And again, it comes back to how safe do we feel? And when we don't feel safe, it's really hard to even just say your boundary, let alone then hold it. And in the episode on trust, we talked a whole bunch about attachment. And so insecure attachment, if we are raised and we do not have a secure attachment to someone, having an insecure attachment can also impact our ability to know what our boundaries are, say those boundaries, state them, hold those boundaries. So for more, I'm not going to go back through the attachment stuff. Just know that I dove a little deeper in that trust episode. The thing is, in those categories I just stated, those people, particularly when we talk about toxic relationships, who benefit from you not having boundaries, they're going to push back when you start setting them. Unfortunately, some people are happier with us when we don't have boundaries. Now, for those of you out there that have good boundaries, thank you for listening, keep listening, and always have. Just give it a little space here to go through this for the rest of us. There's going to be some great tips, of course, and everybody can always use a good tip. So, you know, we make other people's lives easier when we don't have boundaries. And I put easier in quotes. If you could see me right now, I'm quoting easier. They are more likely to get what they want when we simply agree with them, when we don't hold a boundary. Now, of course, this isn't the case for everyone, all right? There is no absolute in life. And I also want to point out that our kids may even act as if they don't want us to have boundaries, right? What kid doesn't want to eat ice cream and popcorn for dinner every night. So I'm just going to remind you that the research shows that kids need boundaries, even when they act like they don't like them or want them. Again, it comes back to when boundaries are in place. And I'd go so far as with the parenting when you have some structure and routine. We've had a few episodes around that. Life is more predictable. It's more consistent. And because of that, setting those boundaries and having that consistency and routine helps kids feel safer, right? When they know what the rules are and what they can and can't do, it makes them feel safer. And it goes back to then they can learn how to self-regulate. They have certain autonomy within the boundaries that you've set as the parent. So this isn't a parenting episode, obviously. I just wanted to, sometimes learning to set boundaries when we have kids can be an easier, safer way, depending upon the environment you're in, right? If you're still with your toxic person, take this part with a grain of salt. If you're not, setting boundaries with your kids is a way to help us not just model that behavior, but reinforce and practice that behavior for ourselves. All right. And even though I've been joking about a lot of this, in reality, life really, really is easier for us and our kids when we set clear, predictable boundaries. Kids really do need that. All right. I have a mentor, and he says that boundaries are for us, that they're not for other people. And maybe I should have mentioned that earlier on, kind of when in the beginning talking about the descriptions of boundaries. In any case, boundaries are for us. And I completely agree with him today. In all honesty, I would not have been able to grasp that earlier in my life. I would definitely have challenged that thought. But I think he's right. The boundaries that we set are for us. They're not for other people. And when you're in a relationship with a toxic person or a narcissist, whether that's a partner, a coworker, or your boss or anyone, they don't want you to have the boundaries, right? It doesn't serve them for you to have boundaries. They want you to do what they want, when they want, and how they want, right? Not for you to follow your own internal compass. Now, guess how I know this? I remember thinking while married that I would set a boundary of something I wouldn't do. And my ex would push past it. And this cycle happened again and again and again. And in hindsight, when I really reflect on this, I truly believe, particularly in the beginning, he was testing me. He was testing me to see just exactly how far he could get me to move my line. And how often would I move my line? And how far could he push me beyond a boundary that I'd set? And the mistake that I made was moving the line. It was my line. And so in those days, I chose to move it. I didn't choose to do something different, like walk away or disengage or actually hold my boundary. And when he repeatedly showed me that my boundaries weren't going to be respected, I could have done something differently. I could have made different choices instead of just constantly feeling like I had no control, which meant I moved my line. I violated my own boundary. And then, of course, I felt angry and resentful about it. Of course we do. When he did that, when we were in that cycle, we both knew that he was the one in control. I, at the time, would never have said that he was in control because, well, in part because I didn't really figure that out until much, much later. But he was. Whatever he wanted, or more importantly, more importantly, however he wanted me to act, he pushed me towards. And it was really, really effective on his part. It became a pattern, and it was an incredibly effective pattern. And I can't think of a specific example off the top of my head. What I can tell you is I remember saying to him so many times, I won't do XYZ. Like we'd be having a conversation and I'd just say kind of in passing, I would never do that. And within a few months, that's exactly what I was doing. I gave into him again and again and dishonored myself. He would find that thing that I would say that I'd never do, and he'd push me towards it. And it was awful. It was awful. It felt terrible. And it really contributed to feeling lost and isolated and embarrassed, right? Really built in some shame in there about who I viewed myself to be because I wasn't living authentically. I was living to make sure that he was happy, to please him. And as I say those words, really, actually, I was living not to go against him, not to feel like I was in trouble or doing something wrong according to him. I did it to feel safe in a relationship that was never going to be safe. Let me say that again. I gave up my boundaries to feel safe in a relationship that was never going to be safe. Feel how that statement feels in your body. And all of that, pardon me, all of that was at the expense of not just me and my needs, but ultimately then the needs of the kids too. Whew. All right. I definitely felt that. So another example of moving our boundaries that's more in alignment with what my mentor would say is what happened with my last boss. So another example. She expected me to not do something. So instead of pushing me over my line, she was trying to rein in what I was supposed to be doing in my work. She drew a line in the sand, and it wasn't in alignment with who I am. And so instead of moving my boundary, I kept my boundary. I held my boundary. And I knew she was trying to paint me into a corner with what, I'm not going to say her boundary. She was trying to paint me into a corner with her expectation. And I just wasn't going to give in to that. So I continued to do what I knew what was right. Now, as you can imagine, that produces some anxiety. To act directly against what I knew was a toxic boss was telling me to do, even though I knew I was doing what was the right course, what was the right thing. Yeah, it gave me some anxiety. Of course it did. And because I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong and that I could show that I had the facts behind me, it was more important to me to keep my boundary, to do what I knew was the right thing in that situation and risk the possible repercussions for her. It was hard. It was hard. And it was really great practice for building my personal boundary muscle. And I think that example does really show how a boundary is for us. My boundary in that situation was that I was going to do the right thing. I was going to do what I knew was the right thing. And this isn't I'm not trying to say I'm smarter or better. I'm trying to protect the parties involved. So I'm not giving all the details, which might feel vague, but I was following documents that told me exactly what to do. And she was trying to tell me that those documents didn't say what they said, right? I mean, it was just really clear. And so it was fantastic practice to follow what my mentor said. The boundary that I held based upon that value that I held was mine. I wasn't trying to control her. I really didn't even want to go against what she was saying. But that boundary that I held was mine, and it was for me. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk all about the tips and tricks for noticing your boundaries and making them stronger. All right, I'll see you in a minute. Are you finding yourself struggling in a relationship and wondering if you're dealing with a narcissist? You're not alone, and I've got a resource that can help. Get my 5 questions to confirm you're not the problem. This helps you identify the emotions associated with being in a controlling relationship. Just head over to locatecoaching.com/free gift and take the first step toward clarity and confidence in your relationships. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Tips and tricks. Here we go. Tips and tricks. I always love the tips and tricks part. The first thing that you can do when we talk about boundaries is to start by noticing discomfort. Because our emotional awareness is always the first step in changing our behavior. So we got to see, how do we feel? Where do we feel it? Our boundaries often show up as discomfort, right? We have a boundary, we say it, we don't hold the line, it gets violated, or we have a boundary, we don't even say it, and it gets violated. And what happens? Well, we feel frustrated. We get resentful. Oh, it's exhausting, right? Having to fight for your boundaries is exhausting. And just like I mentioned in my last, or before the break, rather, in my last example, I was anxious, right? So ask yourself, spend a little time to reflect. Where are you feeling drained? What relationships do you walk away from feeling more drained than lifted up? And another question that we can ask ourselves to see if we're in a place where we're violating our boundaries, our own boundaries, is, this one gets me. Where am I saying yes, but meaning no? Where do I say yes, but I really want to say no? Right? discomfort, whether it's through that frustration, resentment, exhaustion, anxiety, or any other feeling that doesn't feel good, that discomfort is often your boundary trying to get your attention, right? Look at me, do something differently. So our first real tip, that was just kind of a baseline to start from what we just talked about. First actual tip is to get clear on what you really want. Isn't this always what we're talking about? Right? We have to know what we want. Now, research shows that values-based decision making improves our well-being. You can't set a boundary if you don't know where that boundary lies. And knowing what your boundaries are and where they lie, and then consequently where they don't lie, what they aren't, is a really good start. So, ask yourself, what feels okay? What in this situation, what feels okay and what doesn't? Right? So I'm going to go back to that example I just gave about at work. I knew that I needed to hold that boundary for myself because if I didn't, I felt awful. The idea of following what I knew wasn't right, it felt awful. And yes, there was anxiety in the idea of having repercussions for that. But I knew deep down in my body, I felt in my body, I pardon me, I had to keep that boundary, to hold that boundary. So, having boundaries are definitely easier when we're clear with ourselves first. And a lot of the times our boundaries stem directly from our values. So when we know our values and we know what we want, those boundaries are much easier to identify. And then it becomes, in that case, when we're connecting those dots, it just becomes a matter of sticking to them, right? Now, if boundaries are a struggle for you, like I was going to say they used to be for me, but they still are for me, we got to start small. When we change our behavior, it is more successful when we start with baby steps that we can repeat, that we can take actions around repeatedly. And that means practicing those baby steps, small steps, practicing, right? So what that might mean is saying, oh, I'll get back to you. Or, oh, I can't get to that today. Another one that I absolutely think is so fantastic to practice is to not respond immediately to someone. We've definitely talked about this in strategy around toxic relationships and narcissists. Don't respond immediately. And if you're trying to hold a boundary or practice holding a boundary, don't respond right away. It slows things down. It slows down your internal gauge, let's say, because urgency is often one way that people try to push us past our boundaries. It has to be done right now. It's really important, right? And that just isn't always the case. I have one of my closest friends is an LA City fire captain. And one of the greatest gifts in watching him work over the last 20 years has been to start to really understand what is an emergency. So, and I'm telling you, for a lot of us, me included, people want it to seem like it's an emergency so that there is that urgency so that we will respond more quickly and don't have the time to process how it makes us feel, or how it might be challenging us, or just getting an affirmative answer instead of sticking with, I can't do that right now. Right? So really think about that. If someone's constantly got urgent issues that you have to address, what's really happening in that situation? Now, when you start to practice holding your boundaries, expect pushback. People are going to react, especially if they're used to you not having boundaries in the past. And so I tell you this not to dissuade you. Still practice the boundaries when you can. When you expect that there'll be pushback, that's going to happen, then you're more prepared and will be able to respond better in a way that meets your needs. So, I'll give you an example. I've already told you my ex was constantly pushing my boundaries. And the few times that I held my boundary, he pushed back, and he pushed back hard. So expect that this is going to happen. They're going to make it bigger. And when you're prepared for that, it's easier. When we make changes by holding what is perceived as a new boundary, right, to anybody else or to the person that you're in relationship with, they are going to push back to try to get you to do what they want or to try to keep the status quo. So don't think that you're doing something wrong, right? You're not. That's expected. And I invite you to think of it more of just expanding your learning curve, right? You're trying something new, and that often takes time to work through. It's not that anything's wrong. It's just when we're learning something new, we got to kind of stick with it. So keep that in mind. Expect that there'll be pushback. Know that you're trying something new, and know that it's going to take time to work through it. The other thing is, I would say especially if you're getting pushback, is you don't have to explain yourself. And so often when we do try to explain ourselves, we end up weakening our boundary. We move the line. It's like in explaining ourselves, we're talking ourselves out of it, right? And it's been a long time, so I can't think of a specific example, but I can tell you, remembering, feeling like, oh, it's just a little bit. It's okay. I can just change in this one situation, right? So it was as much me convincing myself I didn't have to hold the boundary as it was when I tried to explain what my position was or to defend myself, right? It was me moving it. Yes, there was the expectation from him. And yes, I knew I'd get pushback if I didn't do what was expected. But ultimately, I often was the one that talked myself out of it, right? So know that you don't need a long explanation to justify your position, to justify your boundary. That's not required. We don't have to explain ourselves. We don't. We can do what we know is right for us. And frankly, someone that's not toxic or narcissistic doesn't expect you to explain yourself, right? And when all else feels like it's not working, always remember that no is a complete sentence. So if you find yourself trying to explain and talking yourself out of your position and defending yourself, no is a complete sentence. Now, I understand that's a lot easier said than done. This is a practice that we can move towards. The strength of our boundaries is often in the follow through of them, not trying to explain them to someone. Okay, this next tip, I love this next tip. It's fantastic. It's pause. When you pause, you get to decide. You decide intentionally. You're not just reacting. And when you're not reacting, you're not explaining yourself. Remember that urgency that someone might be trying to use to get you to react, to get you to move your line, your boundary, that isn't in your best interest. Pausing slows things down. And in slowing it down, it gives you the space to say, let me think about that. Or even, I'll get back to you. Or even just pausing to respond. It's okay to give yourself a moment, to pause and process or think about what you really are going to do next. It's okay to do that. Okay, this this next tip might feel completely revolutionary to some of you. Especially, I joke about that, but especially if you're like me and boundaries have been challenging, right? When you've lived with boundaries being a challenge, what I hope is this next tip is really going to open things up for you. Healthy boundaries, when we have healthy boundaries, they support connection with the people we're in relationship with. They do not encourage isolation. And boundaries don't push people away. Boundaries create healthier relationships. We talked about that with the kids. When we have boundaries with our kids, healthy boundaries with our kids, and we create healthy boundaries for our kids so that they can learn healthy boundaries, it improves our relationships. A healthy relationship supports respect. And that's not just respect with each other. That includes respecting ourselves and by extension then our boundaries. The right people in your life don't need you to have no boundaries. They respect boundaries. So it's okay when you have them. It's okay when you express them. And we've talked about this a little bit already. But having consistency builds your boundary muscle. And it's ultimately going to change your patterns. And as that relates specifically to healthy boundaries, you're going to start to feel it, right? As you change your patterns, you're going to start to feel the difference between the relationships that you're in that are healthy and the ones that aren't. And then by extension, I give a speech to high school students around avoiding dating violence. I think I've mentioned that here before. And one of the things that I point out is there are healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships. And then there are toxic or narcissistic relationships, right? So depending upon what relationships you have on that spectrum, as you change and move away from toxic, narcissistic behaviors and relationships and patterns, you might move through unhealthy land before you get to healthy. That's okay. That happens, right? That's sometimes part of the change. Life is not a light switch, right? We don't change everything just on and off. So as you're changing those behaviors, just being as consistent as possible matters. You don't have to get it right every time. Practicing and being consistent is helpful, right? This is not about perfection. That's why it's helpful to understand that we don't go from being in narcissistic relationships. And let me tell you, when you've had one narcissist, you tend to attract a few others while you're moving through your own learning curve, right? So we don't go from one end of the spectrum to the other. We don't hop, right? So just know that creating consistency around building your boundary muscle is going to take time. And it's not, you don't have to be perfect. And the last tip, I kind of touched on it just a bit already, is practice, practice, practice. Practice is so important. And the more we practice our boundaries, the better we get at them. The more we practice anything, the better we get at it. And when we practice, we build the muscle. And then it grows. And as we're moving towards healthy relationships and we're building those muscles and we're practicing our boundaries, it also teaches us who is trustworthy. And all of those things move us, help us to create good, strong, healthy relationships. Remember, boundaries are about having the freedom to be who you are, to choose yourself, and to be respected for it. If this episode hit home, send it to someone you care about, or save it for the next time you feel like your boundaries are really regularly being challenged by someone, or maybe you feel like they're slipping a little. And if you're not already following the podcast, make sure you do so you don't miss what's coming next. You've got this. One thought, one choice, one action at a time. As we wrap up, here's the thing. I've made every mistake. I've literally been there and done that. It's one step at a time, and you'll get there. There's hope. You've got this. If you're struggling in a relationship and wondering if it might be controlling, you're not alone. Download my free PDF at locatecoaching.com/free gift to help you find clarity and confidence. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you soon.